Today, we're zooming in on a profoundly defining chapter in American history, the life, the administration, and the tragic, abbreviated presidency of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. It's a story packed with soaring rhetoric, intense global peril, and an administration that literally left a permanent mark on the world despite its shockingly brief duration. So let's just get right into it.
1,000. You know, it's a number that feels almost impossibly short when you stop and consider the sheer historical weight it carries. On November 22, 1963, as his motorcade wound its way through the streets of Dallas, Texas, JFK's presidency abruptly and violently ended. At that exact moment, he was barely past his first 1,000 days in office. Just 1,000 days to shape an entire legacy.
And that brevity? It's captured perfectly in this tragic duality. Kennedy was the youngest man ever elected president of the United States. And, devastatingly, he was also the youngest to die. It's a really striking contrast, right? It defines how we remember him today. This figure of incredible youth and boundless energy, kind of frozen in time by a sudden end. Okay, let's dive into this and look at where that immense trajectory actually began.
Section 1. The Making of JFK. From Brookline to the Oval Office.
To really understand the president, we first have to understand the making of the man. Born in Brookline, Massachusetts back in 1917 to a family of Irish descent, his political ascent was an absolute whirlwind. I mean, look at this. He goes from a fresh Harvard graduate in 1940 straight into the Navy. Then, post-war, he becomes a Democratic congressman from Boston, a senator by 1953, and finally captures the presidency in 1960. That is 20 years from college grad to leader of the free world. It's a staggering pace for any political career.
And the specific milestones within that rapid rise are just fascinating. In 1943, as a Navy lieutenant, his PT-109 boat was literally rammed and sunk by a Japanese destroyer. Despite his own severe injuries, Kennedy led the survivors through perilous waters to safety. It was an act of genuine heroism. Fast forward a decade to 1953, he marries Jacqueline Bouvier, starting a family that would see immense joy but also profound tragedy, like the loss of their infant son Patrick. But through it all, Kennedy just never stopped moving. While recuperating from a back operation in 1955, he didn't just kick back and rest, he actually wrote Profiles in Courage, winning a Pulitzer Prize for history for it. And then, by 1960, after millions tuned in to watch those groundbreaking television debates with Richard Nixon, he won the popular vote by an absolute hair, making history as the very first Roman Catholic president.
Section 2. Idealism and Domestic Vision. Getting America Moving Again. His overarching campaign pledge was simple but highly ambitious: to get America moving again. He wanted to channel the energy of a whole new generation into actionable domestic progress. And he completely crystallized that vision in his inaugural address with this unforgettable injunction: ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Now, I want to pause here and ask you to really think about that quote for a second. In our current, often pretty fractured political climate, how does a call to national service and collective sacrifice like that resonate with you today? It was a massive shift in tone for the country at the time.
So how did he actually put that idealism into action? Well, his vision was incredibly broad. After 2 years of temporizing, in 1963, he called on Congress to pass the Civil Rights Bill to desegregate hotels, restaurants, and public accommodations. He really wanted America to resume its mission dedicated to the preservation of human rights, launching both the Peace Corps and the Alliance for Progress to bring American idealism to developing nations. But it wasn't just policy, it was culture too. Jacqueline Kennedy took the lead in seeking to make the White House a world-class museum. She literally saved architectural treasures from the Wrecker's Ball and dramatically improved the appearance of Pennsylvania Avenue. It was a total elevation of the national culture.
Section 3. The Cold War Crisis. A Vengeful Era. Now, all that soaring rhetoric and cultural elevation at home stood in stark contrast to the rest of the globe. Because despite all that domestic idealism, the Cold War was still on, and it was on with an absolute vengeance. And this brilliantly illustrates the era's massive central tension. On one hand, you had this high-minded domestic idealism, the push for civil rights, the Peace Corps, the arts, but on the other, brutal Cold War realities were continuously crashing right into the Oval Office. He was basically balancing a vision for a better society with the literal threat of global annihilation.
Let's map out that escalation for a second, because it happened incredibly fast. Just shortly after his inauguration in 1961, Kennedy permits armed Cuban exiles to invade their homeland. The Bay of Pigs? A total failure. Soon after, the Soviet Union renews its campaign against West Berlin. Kennedy responds by bumping up military strength in outer space efforts. Moscow reacts by putting up the Berlin Wall.
Then we hit the summer of 1962, and the timeline gets incredibly dark with the Cuban Missile Crisis. The tension just kept ratcheting up, literally one terrifying flashpoint after another, which eventually forced the desperate need for the 1963 Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. The peak of that tension definitely requires a closer look. It's October 1962. Air reconnaissance makes a terrifying discovery. The Soviets have secretly installed nuclear missiles in Cuba. The threat is immediate. So what's the response? A strict quarantine. Essentially a blockade on all offensive weapons bound for the island. The pacing of history in these few days is just frantic. The world literally trembles on the absolute brink of nuclear war. Every single hour counts here. Kennedy initiates these urgent secret negotiations, finally persuading the Kremlin to remove the missiles in exchange for certain American concessions. Guys, it was the closest the world has ever come to the edge.
Section 4. An unfinished legacy. The nation denied.
So, recognizing that both sides had a vital interest in stopping the arms race, Kennedy had helped secure a partial nuclear test ban treaty in 1963. There was this sense that, hey, maybe the worst had passed. But then we reached November. The sudden, violent end to those 1,000 days in Dallas left a profound global mourning in its wake. When we look at how Americans remember him today, it's this really unique blend of the personal and the political. They remember his immense charm and that sharp wit. They remember the bravery he showed in the Pacific and the sheer glamour he and Jackie brought to Washington. They remember his intelligence in navigating the Cuban Missile Crisis. But above all those traits, the defining characteristic of his memory is unfulfilled potential, the promise of future leadership that was just suddenly gone. Which leaves us with the ultimate historical what-if. How different might the latter half of the 20th century have looked had those 1,000 days not been cut short? If that motorcade in Dallas had simply driven on, how would the Cold War, the Civil Rights Movement, and the whole American story have changed? It's a question that has haunted historians for decades now, and one I'm going to leave you to ponder today. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.